The sound of laughter in a small town can either feel like a warm blanket or a sharp blade. For 17-year-old Maya, it was almost always the blade. Standing at 5'4" with dirt permanently smudged under her fingernails and hair tied back in a loose, faded band, she was the girl everyone in Millfield drove past on their way to somewhere better. Her family owned 40 acres of failing soil at the edge of the county line, a patch of ground that yielded more dust than profit. Every morning before sunrise, while her classmates were asleep, Maya was out in the barn, hauling 50-pound bags of feed, fixing broken fences with rusty wire, and caring for her sick father. She wore her older brother's oversized flannel shirts, worked till her palms were calloused, and kept her head down. To the kids at Oak Ridge High, she was simply the farm girl, a convenient target for anyone who wanted to feel powerful. The town of Millfield was divided by a train track and an invisible ocean of money. On the south side sat the sprawling estates, the country club, and the kids who drove brand new pickup trucks bought with their parents' credit cards. At the top of that social food chain sat Julian Croft and his little circle. Julian's father owned the bank that held the mortgage on half the farms in the county, including Maya's family property. Julian knew it, too. He walked through the high school hallways like he owned the concrete beneath his feet, flanked by two guys, Carter and Brody, who were eager to execute whatever cruel idea Julian came up with next. Maya had spent 3 years trying to make herself invisible, stepping into the shadows whenever she heard their heavy boots echoing down the corridor. But in a small high school, invisibility is an illusion that only lasts until someone gets bored. The bullying didn't start with violence, it started with small, methodical humiliations designed to erode her dignity. First, it was the comments as she walked past the bleachers during lunch. They called her barnyard and made exaggerated sniffing noises, asking if she'd bathed in hog feed that morning. Then came the accidents. Julian would conveniently bump into her shoulder in the crowded hallway, sending her faded canvas backpack spilling across the floor, its contents, scuffed notebooks, second-hand textbooks, and cheap pencils, rolling into the mud tracked in from the rain. Maya would silently drop to her knees, pick up her things, and walk away without uttering a word. She never cried in front of them. She never yelled back. Her silence only seemed to irritate Julian more, turning his casual cruelty into a personal crusade to break her. What Julian and his friends didn't know, what no one in Millfield knew, was the secret buried beneath the dirt of the Miller farm. Maya's quiet demeanor wasn't born out of fear or weakness. It was born out of profound, calculated discipline. When Maya was 10 years old, long before her father's lungs began to fail and the medical bills started piling up, her uncle Eli had come to live with them. Eli was a retired military instructor who had spent over 15 years teaching close-quarters combat, specifically specializing in Krav Maga, the brutal, highly practical defense system designed for real-world survival. Eli saw the world differently than most. He believed that the world didn't care about fair play, and that true strength wasn't about looking big, it was about redirecting energy, neutralizing threats instantly, and mastering complete self-control. For 6 years, while other kids were playing video games or going to mall food courts, Maya spent her evenings in the old hay loft with Eli. He didn't teach her how to win points in a ring, he taught her how to survive. He taught her how to turn her small frame into an engine of kinetic force. She learned how a simple palm strike to the throat could drop a man twice her size, how to break a wrist lock in half a second, and how to use the geometry of the human body against itself. But above all, Eli hammered one absolute rule into her mind every single day: violence is a last resort. Your skill is a shield, not a weapon. If you use this to inflict harm out of pride or anger, you have already lost. That philosophy became Maya's prison and her sanctuary. Every time Julian shoved her into a locker, every time Carter poured sticky soda over her boots, every time Brody kicked her books into the gutter, Maya's body instinctively registered the threat. Her mind instantly calculated the 3 distinct ways she could dismantle them in under 2 seconds. She knew precisely where to strike Julian's jaw to knock him unconscious, how to sweep Carter's legs, and how to dislocate Brody's shoulder. Yet, she held back. She clamped her jaw shut, forced her hands into her pockets, and absorbed the insult. She endured the pain not because she was afraid of them, but because she was afraid of what would happen if she let go of her training. The situation at home was deteriorating rapidly, adding immense pressure to Maya's fragile world. Her father's respiratory illness had reached a critical stage, requiring expensive daily medication and oxygen tanks that their meager farm income couldn't cover. Her mother worked late shifts at a local diner, her eyes hollow with exhaustion. To make matters worse, Julian's father, Richard Croft, had recently visited the farm with a stack of legal documents. With a cold, calculated smile, he reminded Maya's father that the bank was preparing to foreclose on the property by the end of the month unless the overdue balance was paid in full. The Croft family wanted the land to build an upscale housing development, and they were using every legal lever to squeeze the Miller family dry. Julian knew about the foreclosure. He wore that knowledge like armor, using it to torment Maya with a terrifying new level of arrogance. He would pass her in the hallway and whisper that he couldn't wait to see her living out of a rusty station wagon down by the river. He would mock her father's failing health, loudly asking if the family needed a loan for a casket. Still, Maya swallowed the poison. She took on extra shifts doing manual labor for elderly neighbors, worked until her bones ached, and focused entirely on keeping her family afloat. She convinced herself that high school was temporary, that if she could just endure a few more months until graduation, she could escape the cruel echo chamber of Millfield. The boiling point arrived on an overcast Friday afternoon in late October. The sky was the color of bruised slate, heavy with the promise of cold autumn rain. School had just let out, and the parking lot was chaotic with shouting teenagers, revving engines, and the slam of car doors. Maya was walking toward her rusty 1998 pickup truck, holding a worn cardboard box containing her biology project, a delicate, meticulously built glass terrarium that represented weeks of hard work and accounted for half her final grade. As she neared her truck, the loud, obnoxious roar of a modified V8 engine cut through the noise. Julian's brand new lifted Ford truck pulled up right behind her, blocking her path to her vehicle. Julian stepped out of the driver's seat, followed closely by Carter and Brody. They were laughing loudly, carrying energy that felt volatile and malicious. Julian leaned against the hood of his truck, crossing his arms and smirking as he looked Maya up and down. He demanded to know where she thought she was going, mocking her appearance and asking if her trashy little truck even had enough gas to make it out of the lot. Maya paused, her knuckles white around the edges of the cardboard box. She took a deep, steadying breath, remembering Eli's voice echoing in her head, breathe through the noise. Control the room by controlling yourself. She turned her head slightly, kept her eyes focused on the ground, and politely asked them to step aside so she could get home. Julian didn't move. Instead, he stepped closer, closing the distance until he was standing less than 2 feet away from her. He reached out and aggressively shoved the cardboard box in her hands. The sudden movement tipped the delicate glass structure inside, sending a sharp cracking sound through the air as the terrarium shattered inside the box. Dirt and glass leaked through the bottom onto Maya's boots. Julian laughed, a cold, empty sound, and looked back at Carter and Brody, who joined in. Julian sneered, telling her that trash belonged in the dirt anyway, just like her broken family and her dying father. He told her that within a week, his father would sign the paper to throw her family off their land, and there wasn't a single thing she could do about it. Maya stood completely still. Her breathing remained rhythmic and slow, even as a cold, sharp focus descended over her mind. She looked up and met Julian's eyes directly for the first time in 3 years. There was no fear in her gaze, no tears, no plead for mercy. There was only a profound, dark stillness that seemed to make Julian momentarily uncomfortable. Unaccustomed to anything other than compliance from his victims, Julian's pride flared into outright rage. He raised his hand, stepped forward, and delivered a harsh, open-handed slap across Maya's left cheek. The sound crackled through the parking lot like a gunshot, drawing the immediate attention of dozens of students who froze in their tracks. The impact turned Maya's face to the side. Her skin burned with red heat, and her cheek throbbed with the sting of the blow. The surrounding crowd went dead silent. Everyone expected her to drop to her knees, to burst into tears, or to cover her face and run. Carter and Brody smirked, waiting for the familiar breakdown. Julian stepped back, raising his hands mockingly, asking her what she was going to do about it, mockingly calling her a weak, pathetic farm girl. But Maya didn't fall. She didn't cry. Slowly, deliberately, she lowered the ruined cardboard box to the asphalt, set it down gently near her front tire, and stood back up to her full height. When Maya turned her head back to face Julian, the shift in her posture was instantaneous and absolute. The slumped, defensive posture of the bullied farm girl vanished. Her spine straightened, her shoulders rolled back into alignment, her center of gravity dropped slightly, and her chin tucked in to protect her throat. Her eyes were no longer those of a timid high school senior, they were the icy, analytical eyes of a trained combatant scanning a tactical target. In that fraction of a second, the years of silent endurance stripped away. She didn't feel anger, she felt complete, absolute clarity. The threat was active, physical violence had been initiated, and the rules of engagement had changed. Julian, misinterpreting her silence for defiance, sneered and stepped forward to shove her again with both hands. That was his final mistake. The moment his hands left his sides, Maya moved with a speed that shocked everyone watching. She didn't step back, she stepped directly into his attack vector. Using a classic Krav Maga defense, her left arm swept up violently, parrying both of Julian's wrists outward and completely breaking his momentum. Before he could even register that his hands had missed their target, Maya pivoted on her back foot, driving her palm upward in a devastating, controlled strike directly beneath Julian's chin. The impact snapped his head back, rattling his teeth and sending his eyes rolling into the back of his head. Julian stumbled backward, gasping for air as his balance collapsed entirely. But Maya wasn't finished. Following the core tenet of her training, neutralize the threat completely so it cannot counterattack, she stepped forward, swept her foot behind his lead ankle, and drove her forearm into his chest. Julian went down hard, his back hitting the wet asphalt with a dull, heavy thud that knocked every cubic inch of oxygen out of his lungs. He lay there, clutching his chest, wheezing violently, his face pale with sudden, terrifying realization. The entire parking lot was frozen in shock, no one spoke, no one moved, and no one could process what they had just seen. Seeing their leader dropped in less than 2 seconds, Carter and Brody reacted out of pure instinct and blind rage. Carter lunged at Maya from her right, attempting a sloppy, aggressive tackle to throw her to the ground. Maya didn't even look directly at him. She felt his body weight shifting, pivoted on her left heel, and allowed his momentum to carry him past her. As he flew by, she grasped his outstretched arm, twisted his wrist counterclockwise to lock his elbow joint, and delivered a precise, sharp knee strike directly into his floating ribs. Carter let out a high-pitched cry of pain as his breath was cut short, his knees buckling instantly as he collapsed sideways onto the gravel. Brody came next, charging recklessly from the left with his fist pulled far back for a heavy punch. Maya slipped inside the arc of his swing with practiced ease, letting his fist pass harmlessly over her right shoulder. She immediately wrapped her right arm around his extended neck, applying a sudden, firm sleeper hold while simultaneously planting her hips low. With a seamless leverage throw, she hoisted Brody off his feet and slammed him onto the cold ground beside Carter. Within 8 seconds of Julian's slap, all three bullies were lying on the pavement, gasping, groaning, and entirely incapacitated, while Maya stood in the center of the ring, barely breathing hard, her hands held in a light, defensive posture. The silence that settled over the high school parking lot was deafening. Dozens of students stood with their mouths open, phones raised in mid-air, having recorded the entire encounter from start to finish. Julian was struggling to sit up, holding his bruised jaw, his eyes wide with a mixture of intense pain and profound terror. He looked up at Maya as if he were looking at a ghost, completely unable to comprehend how the weak, quiet farm girl he had tormented for years had just effortlessly dismantled 3 varsity athletes in a matter of seconds. He stammered, asking what she was, his voice trembling with a vulnerability he had never shown in his life. Maya didn't yell. She didn't brag, and she didn't celebrate. She slowly stepped down from her combat stance, her shoulders relaxing back into her calm, everyday posture. She walked over to where Julian was sitting on the ground, stepped right up to him, and looked down at him with cold, quiet dignity. She told him that strength isn't about hurting people who can't fight back, and that real power is knowing you can destroy someone, but choosing to give them mercy instead. She leaned down slightly, her voice low enough that only Julian could hear, reminding him that if he or his friends ever came near her, her family, or anyone else in that school again, she wouldn't hold back next time. Julian nodded rapidly, completely broken, his arrogance entirely drained. Maya turned away, walked over to her rusty truck, picked up the shattered cardboard box with her broken biology project, and placed it carefully in the passenger seat. She unlocked her driver's side door, stepped inside, started the engine with a familiar, rumbling roar, and drove out of the parking lot without looking back once in her rearview mirror. The video of the incident, captured from multiple angles by stunned onlookers, swept through the town of Millfield like a wildfire before the sun even set that evening, completely shattering the myth of Julian Croft's invulnerability and changing the social dynamic of the school forever. However, the physical victory in the parking lot was only the beginning of a much larger, more dangerous battle. The next morning, the reality of their situation struck back with cold, legal severity. A sleek black luxury sedan pulled up the long, gravel driveway of the Miller farm. Out stepped Richard Croft, flanked by two corporate lawyers in sharp suits. Richard's face was red with fury, his eyes burning with vengeance. He bypassed Maya's father, who was resting on the porch, and walked straight up to Maya, who was outside chopping firewood. He accused her of assault, threatening to file criminal charges that would put her behind bars for years unless her family surrendered the farm immediately and signed over the deed without contesting the foreclosure. Maya's father stepped off the porch, leaning heavily on his wooden cane, coughing weakly as he tried to defend his daughter. Richard Croft scoffed, tossing a thick folder of legal papers onto the wooden porch table. He gave them 24 hours to vacate the premises, stating that the bank was officially accelerating the foreclosure due to default and that law enforcement would be called to remove them if they refused to comply. The stress of the confrontation caused Maya's father to collapse into a violent coughing fit, his oxygen levels dropping dangerously low. Maya rushed to his side, helping him inside to his bed, her heart heavy with an overwhelming weight. Fighting off bullies was simple, fighting a corrupt system designed to crush the poor felt nearly impossible. That evening, as the rain finally began to fall against the farm's tin roof, Maya sat in the dimly lit living room with her uncle Eli, who had driven down from the city as soon as he heard about the trouble. Eli sat across from her, his weathered face carved with deep lines of concern and wisdom. He looked at his niece, saw the red mark still visible on her cheek, and listened to the entire story without interrupting once. When she finished, Maya lowered her head, apologizing to Eli for breaking his cardinal rule, confessing that she had lost her temper and brought disaster down on their family's head. She felt responsible for losing the land her grandfather had built with his own hands. Eli reached out, placing his calloused hand over hers, his voice steady and warm. He told her that she hadn't broken the rule. He explained that Krav Maga was designed to protect human dignity when all peaceful avenues had been closed. He reminded her that she had absorbed years of abuse to keep the peace, and that defending herself against an unprovoked physical assault was not an act of pride, but an act of self-preservation. But then Eli smiled, a slow, knowing smile that caught Maya completely off guard. He reached into his coat pocket, pulled out a faded leather binder filled with yellow documents, and laid it on the table between them. Eli revealed a secret that he and Maya's grandfather had kept hidden for over 20 years to protect the family from corporate greed. The land they lived on was not just 40 acres of poor farming soil. Years ago, Maya's grandfather had discovered that the deep bedrock running beneath the southern ridge of the property contained a massive, high-yield natural spring fed by an underground aquifer. The water was exceptionally pure, rich in rare minerals, and worth millions of dollars to commercial water distribution companies. Recognizing the danger of revealing such wealth in a town run by predatory banks, her grandfather had quietly registered the mineral rights under a separate, irrevocable land trust in Maya's name when she was born. Because the mineral rights were legally separated from the agricultural mortgage, Richard Croft's bank had no legal right to foreclose on the entire property without resolving the overriding claims of the primary trust. In fact, Richard Croft had discovered the existence of the aquifer months ago through an illegal soil survey and was attempting to fraudulently seize the farm before Maya turned 18 and inherited full legal control of the trust. The entire harassment campaign, the legal pressure, and Julian's behavior had all been part of a desperate attempt to force the Miller family off the land before the legal truth came to light. Armed with this revelation, Maya felt a wave of relief and determination wash over her. Early the next morning, Maya, Eli, and a reputable state attorney arrived at the Millfield Municipal Courthouse, where Richard Croft was preparing to finalize the eviction papers. The conference room was quiet until Eli laid the original land trust documents, along with the illegal soil survey reports retrieved from Croft's own contractors, directly onto the table in front of the bank's legal team. The head attorney for the bank looked at the papers, his face turning pale as he realized the catastrophic legal liability his client had brought upon the institution. The tables turned instantly and completely. The bank was forced to immediately drop all foreclosure proceedings against the Miller family, void the outstanding debt due to corporate fraud violations, and pay a substantial settlement to cover the family's medical bills and legal fees. Richard Croft faced a formal state investigation for bank fraud and illegal land seizure, his reputation and financial empire crumbling in a single afternoon. Julian, stripped of his family's untouchable status and humiliated by the viral video that continued to circulate throughout the county, was suspended from school and forced to perform community service, his reign as the school's top bully permanently erased. A month later, the clouds finally cleared over Millfield, giving way to a crisp, bright morning. The Miller farm was bustling with life. With the settlement funds and the ethical development of the natural spring, the house was fully renovated, and Maya's father received top-tier medical care that restored his health and brought the color back to his face. The small farm was transformed into a community center and specialized athletic facility where local youth could come to learn martial arts, discipline, and self-confidence for free. Maya stood in the center of the newly built training barn, the smell of fresh cedar hanging in the air. She wore her familiar faded flannel shirt, but her stance was strong, her head held high, and her eyes bright with peace. A group of younger kids sat before her on the blue mats, watching her with deep respect as she demonstrated a simple, defensive hand movement. She paused, looked around at her family standing near the doorway, her father smiling, her mother holding a hot cup of coffee, and Eli nodding in silent approval, and turned back to her students. She told the young crowd that the greatest lesson they would ever learn in life had nothing to do with how hard they could hit or how fast they could strike. She reminded them that true strength is not measured by the damage you can inflict on others, but by the quiet power you keep inside when the world tests your spirit. She looked directly into the eyes of a small, shy kid sitting in the front row and smiled softly. In a world that often measures power by how loudly you can crush those below you, the quietest heart is often carrying the greatest strength of all.